of course, its benefits, its goals. Now, here we are. Welcome, Ryan.
Hello.
So, we've managed to navigate all the different technical challenges. Are you okay on your end?
I am. All I would say is I can't actually see you in Instagram.
Oh, can you not? Let me see if there's anybody watching this right now. Maybe you can put in the comment section whether you can see me or not. Hang on, maybe just I check this here.
And those of you on YouTube, we are doing an end of session celebration for Kriya Yoga Awareness Month here. And I'm with David McGrath, and we're currently working out some technical details, but we'll be getting started here in just a second.
So I can see you on both, Ryan, and you, me.
I still see just you, but you know what? I can see you on my computer through YouTube, so I think we might be okay.
Okay. Okay, well, I suppose we've said what our reasoning for coming here this evening and gathering is. It has been the month of November. Ryan, you had the idea, I think it was last year, to begin a Kriya Yoga Awareness Month.
Yeah, I figured it might be a good idea to celebrate Kriya Yoga, and dedicating a whole month to it is a great idea.
Yeah. I'm experiencing a lot of echo on my side.
Yeah.
I'm
We're going to
my
fix
voice
that.
back quite a bit.
All right, how's the echo now?
Now let me see.
There we go.
It's gone.
All right, good.
Perfect. Thanks for that. Right, so we can get started. We get stuck in the deep end. During the whole course of the month, Ryan, I have, on my end, kind of gone through yoga, Kriya Yoga, the ins and outs of what they both are, how they associate, the practices, and how one goes about getting engaged in those practices and then the benefits of them. And during the course of the month, people have been presenting their ideas, their comments, their insights, and questions. So I've kind of puzzled together all of that in a way where we could maybe create some coherency in what we're presenting here this evening. And I suppose where we can start is right at the beginning, the definition for yoga. When I put this out to people, how would you define yoga? Some of the definitions were that yoga is stillness. Another was that yoga is the union of the mind, body, and soul. And I was just wondering, that's just two simple definitions. It's not easy to sum up what yoga is in a sentence, but you want to try?
Well, I guess I would go back to the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and the idea that yoga is the ending of the fluctuations and changes in consciousness. So stillness might be a good terminology to use, but stillness in the sense of complete stillness, not just stopping of thinking, but the ability to abide and be present and observe without all the changes and fluctuations that we usually experience while we're alive and doing things.
Yeah. So what came to my mind when you're just talking, it's very appropriate, and I think we're quite inclined to just resort back to Patanjali's definition and then the variations and how you go about explaining that definition. But I always remember Mr. Davis just paralleling the definition of yoga to samadhi, and then without getting into too much technical discussion, just that as being effortless conversation, the capacity just to be aware without becoming entangled in identifications.
Right.
Yeah. And so from there, then, we've been building awareness around Kriya Yoga. So the follow-on question would be, well, what exactly is Kriya Yoga, and how does it differ to other forms of yoga?
Is that for me, or are you going to answer that?
Well, I suppose, again, I resort to Patanjali's teaching, and I think this is a kind of a helpful, because we know Kriya Yoga as a form of yoga that was brought to the West through the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda and those who preceded him, and again, those who succeeded him. But we also know Kriya Yoga from the Yoga Sutra Patanjali just to be the practices which are going to facilitate our being able to experience what I referred to as effortless concentration or stillness or yoga. In a nutshell, the Kriya Yoga is the practices which are going to help facilitate that. But maybe you want to say more about what practices
No, I think that's a good way to look at it, because the idea of Kriya, the idea of action and taking action to accomplish things. I mean, many spiritual teachers say that you don't have to do anything, that everything is God, that everything is as spiritual as it's going to get. However, you can say that to someone and that doesn't really help them a whole lot. But the beautiful thing about like Kriya Yoga and other spiritual traditions is that there are formulas, methodologies, ways of living that help to kind of remove the ignorance so that you can experience and appreciate that everything is spirit, that everything is this infinite consciousness. So I guess when I consider Kriya Yoga on a broader sense, it's any activity which facilitates the removal of ignorance so that you can know, oh, I am free. Because there's a big difference between just having someone tell you and you repeat it mentally, and then having someone who experiences it, feels it, lives it. So the Kriya part of it is the activities that you do to have that realization.
Yeah. When you were talking there, we've talked previously on other occasions, we can use words like purifying and clarifying. The word that came to my mind was purging. It was just a word that came up in conversation with someone today. But it's when you were talking about ignorance, there's just so much going on for us at a physical level, an emotional level, a mental level, that we're so entangled with that it just prevents us from being able to experience another way of being, a clarified, purified way of being. And so the Kriya, the practices kind of help to purge or to kind of shake up how we get entangled with everything that's going on physically, emotionally, and mentally, so that we're kind of able to shift into a new position.
Yeah.
A lot of people joining here, Ryan. I'm just flicking through. I've got a lot of names, which is great. It's good to have their presence here. So thank you all for joining, for taking part. We've just began by reflecting on what yoga was and what Kriya Yoga was and the difference between the two. And I think at this point, Ryan, I might just say, because there's some people who've been following what I've been posting on Instagram, and there's been a lot of...
You've done an excellent job, by the way.
Yeah, I set a goal at the beginning of the month. Okay, this Kriya Yoga Awareness Month, I'm going to give it my all. And so I did that as best I could. And some people were just bringing the questions around, well, I thought yoga was about, exercise. I thought the yoga was about going to studios and having a yoga mat. And we've already started by talking about like yoga and the difference between yoga as the experience of samadhi or stillness or effortless concentration. And then we're talking about the practices. But if we're just to back up a little bit for those who might be engaging in the conversation, who are still kind of trying to figure out how did we get from yoga mats and yoga studios to talking about this experience, which is, I don't think we use the word, but transcendental or outside of our usual experience. Do you want to say anything around that? Or?
Sure. First of all, I think it's important to recognize that yoga can really speak to people on all different levels, and it's meant to. And that really, ultimately, the purpose of yoga is a transcendental experience. So no matter where you are, whether you're in a studio, whether you're practicing hatha yoga or asana, or you're practicing mantra or contemplation or reading the Yoga Sutras, the reason we do all this is to, again, remove that ignorance so that we can experience the transcendent part of ourselves. But what's neat about that was earlier today, as I was driving around running errands, I was listening to a discussion by a Swami, and he was talking about the 5 koshas, or the 5 sheaths. And I know we talked about this in Ireland when we did our retreat back in August. But what he was saying is, we have these 5 sheaths, or these 5 bodies. There's the physical body, there's the prana, or the breath, or the emotional body, there's the mental body, and so on. We go through all these sheaths. And what's beautiful about yoga is that you have to start where you are, which means that maybe right now you can't comprehend something transcendental. And that's very hard for even people who've been at it for a while to do. But you can feel your body. You can purify the body. You can change your diet. You can treat your body like a temple. And that's working on one of those levels, the Annamaya kosha, or the part of our body that's made up of food. It's made up of matter. And so if that's where you are, then you focus on that. And then in time, as you get stronger and as you become clearer, you start to recognize, oh, well, I'm not really defined by my body, because obviously my body was one way. I started practicing yoga and it's changed. So it's not really, I can't say that's who I am, because it can change. And then you start to contemplate, well, maybe I am the energy or the life force or the prana within my body. And then you spend time in your practice engaging pranayama, or learning to work out your emotional baggage. And after you get through that stage, well, then you can move on maybe to the next level, and so on. So I think it's important to recognize that the ultimate purpose of yoga is transcendence. That's just like saying the ultimate purpose of Christianity or other spiritual practices is oneness in God or oneness in the divine. Well, that's an abstract thing that most people can't really get their mind around. But you could get your mind around being nice to your neighbor or being of service. And from there, you start to experience sort of deeper levels of the practice. So it's all of these things, really.
Yeah. And if we just tie it back in when we were defining what Kriya Yoga is, as being the practices which help us to experience yoga, oneness.
Mhm.
While we might begin with working where we're at, the physical, and then progressively working to more subtle expressions of who we are, the physical is still always there with us. And even though we get very good at getting into the more subtle realms of what we're experiencing, we're still experiencing the physical body. Um, and, and we're still engaging with the world through the physical body. So it's transcendental in that our relationship to it is now one which is kind of freed up from the old identifications with the body, but the body still remains, and that physical experience is still there. But there's been a complete shift through the kriyas, through the practices, and as you say, the practice may be performing asanas or simple breath work. Okay, so
Right, exactly.
when we look at it as yoga and then Kriya Yoga, what people started to ask was, well, what's the reasons? Why am I going to do this? And we talked about, transcendental experience. And that's quite big and grandiose, but people come to this with different, I suppose, demands or needs or requirements. And it's kind of like, why bother? This Kriya Yoga stuff is new to me. Why would I bother? And I kind of put it out there at one point, and someone put forward the idea, well, Kriya Yoga is going to help you to experience eternal peace because of the direct experience and knowledge about the truth of life. Does that resonate with you?
Seems like a good answer.
Yeah, I think so. I just when I read it, I thought it seemed like a good answer too. It's interesting when we kind of have to go around defining stuff using our, the vocabulary we have available to us. The eternal peace because of the direct experience and knowledge about the truth of life. When I read it, I saw how it had meaning, but I also saw how the word peace can sometimes distract us, a bit like what we were just talking about. We do change and shift how we're relating to our physical body, even as we move into progressively deeper practices. We're still relating to the body, but our perspective has shifted. But peace,
Right.
the world isn't going to change, and the goings on of the world isn't going to change, and the things that we experience in our life may be of challenge or not, depending on how the ebb and flow of life. But the peace comes because of that fundamental relationship that we've moved into with our physical, our
Yeah.
emotional, and mental. That's just what stood out to me when I read it first of
Yeah.
all. Yeah.
I think it's a great answer, and the way you started the question, I've been asked that a bit too, like, why should I do this? And I don't
Yeah.
really ever have a good answer for that because I don't know why I did it. I just I just started doing it. It was of interest to me. And I
Yeah.
think that ultimately when it comes down to it, this isn't something that you can sell someone and you shouldn't have to. It's
Yeah.
like, why do I want to play the mandolin? Well, I don't want to run around telling everyone why the mandolin is wonderful. I just want to play
Yeah.
the mandolin. But going back to what you were just talking about there, I think that's a distinction needs to be made because we can think of peace as sort of like the end, like,
Yeah.
oh, I've achieved something, so therefore I don't have to do anything anymore, or that's it. And I think a
Mm.
lot of people strive for this idea of just reaching a place where they don't have to be responsible or do anything anymore, or feel really. They want to reach a place where they don't have to get engaged in the changing flows of their emotions and so on. But my experience has been that the piece that I think is most important really isn't an end result. It's more of like recognizing you're on an adventure. When you're on an adventure, things go wrong and things go well. But the thing is, you're on an adventure. It's like when I think of people who are interested in sports and athletics, when something comes their way, they don't let it beat them down. It's a challenge that they think, yeah, okay, how can I grow from this? And so I think it's important to recognize that part of the practice of yoga isn't to find an end result where you retire. It's not a retirement plan. It's more about growing into a place of being alive in every moment and loving it, and also recognizing that when you don't love it, that's part of the adventure too. So the idea of peacefulness, I think it's good to kind of consider, what do we mean by that? And in my experience, it's not, like I said, a place of retirement. It's actually like being alive, being engaged in life, being responsive in life, and enjoying it. That's
Yeah.
that's what I would say to clarify that a little bit.
Yeah. That's um with that, you talked about you couldn't remember why you got into Kriya Yoga. You're just interested in it. Because the next question is, what got you into practicing Kriya Yoga? Um, I do remember why I got into it. Not specifically Kriya Yoga, why I got into meditation initially, and then it kind of unfolded from there. I think there was a sense of um, I could be more, or I could be better, or I think it was a kind of a want to um, gain knowledge, or I think to put it more clearly, just to be perfect, to have it all figured out. I wanted to have it all figured out, and it's it seemed like when you went into that kind of private space of meditation, you were kind of getting to grips with something that was unfamiliar, and that in itself might give, well, you're being promised that you're going to have this experience of a different way of looking at life, um, and regardless of the tradition, at the time I wasn't involved in Kriya Yoga, but there was still the same emphasis that you're going to start to have a new relationship to yourself and to understand your own presence in the world from a different perspective. And I think all of that is very enticing and alluring. Um, but through the process, I started to figure out that it was that search for something to kind of make me fixed, to kind of sort me out. And I suppose preceding that, it would have been reading books and listening to people talking and just trying to get more knowledge and more information and kind of feeling like that was going to, in some way, help me to sort out and understand who I was. And then when meditation started, that was the next step. And then when I'm getting involved in Kriya Yoga, there's a lot that you learn through the process of Kriya Yoga. Um, and the whole thing, now in hindsight, I can see that it was an attempt to try and make David perfect, make him
Mm.
some kind of all round great guy that everybody would love, and he'd have the answers for everything, and he'd know everything, and that kind of idea was floating around in there at some level. And I think that's kind of normal in some regard. It's it's something which kind of helps us to get involved in it, as you say, to get the interest and get engaged in it. And in the process itself, does it answer that satisfaction? I think it does, but it's the end result isn't, you can never imagine what it actually is going to be. But you start getting closer to
Right.
it. And then, the idea of perfection, well, then that takes on a whole different perspective. Um, so
Yeah.
the question that comes up here is, for someone who has just joined, why is Kriya Yoga so important? And this might tie in with what
Yeah.
we said already, but is there anything that comes to mind when you're asked that?
Before we go to that question, could I jump back to the last one for a minute?
Of course, yeah, of course.
Okay. Two things I was considering there was, number one, I do remember when I became interested in Kriya Yoga, but it wasn't necessarily that all of a sudden Kriya Yoga came out of the blue. I had always been interested in religion and spirituality. And for me, while I wasn't trying to have a sense of perfection, I was wanting to know what's going on. I would look around at life and I didn't understand. And I wanted to have a better sense of what are we participating in. And so I had been interested in meditation, which I sort of found through some of these, I guess, more occult studies. And someone knew I was into it, and they recommended the book Autobiography of a Yogi. And it kind of proceeded from there. And then when you mentioned towards the end of that you don't know what it's going to be like, I think that's a good distinction to make, because I remember when I first started practicing after reading Autobiography of a Yogi, I sure knew what it was going to be like. I knew what I was going to experience, the experience I was looking for. And over the years, it's been 23 years now. What I found is what I thought it was is absolutely not what I thought it was going to be. but I was fortunate in that I was able to remain open to the possibility of change and see things differently. And I was open to sort of shift my viewpoint, say, from what I thought it was when I was 19 and 20, to allow it to develop into, what the experience was to become. So I think for a lot of people, when they begin their spiritual path, Kriya Yoga or otherwise, it's important to remember that it's good to have your initial inspiration and to let that carry you forward. But it's also really good to recognize that as you go, you're going to have to be open to noticing that, what you thought California was going to be like when you were just dreaming about it or saw it on TV might not be what it looks like when you're actually there in the middle of LA. It's not a really good analogy, but I think it works.
Oh, it communicates the idea, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And your other question, what was the question again?
well, for someone who has just joined, as in just joined in this tradition or Kriya Yoga teaching, why is Kriya Yoga so important?
Oh, um,
Well, maybe I could follow it up with the next question as a way of kind of rounding it up. The next
yeah.
question is, how has practicing Kriya Yoga benefited you?
Okay. Um, it's made me a good deal more patient. It's made me a good deal more broad-minded and understanding. It's given me a greater sense of faith in what happens in life. It's generally made me quite a bit more happier and mentally and emotionally and psychologically consistent. And the experiences in meditation are pretty rewarding in themselves. That's probably what I would say. Many people ask me questions about, sort of what supernatural or fantastic things have you experienced, and I've experienced some neat things, sure, and I know you have too, David, and others as well. But I think it's important to recognize that there are so many moments in life that are really profound, and that can be as simple as when I walked out this morning and I saw the full moon through the clouds, or watching a garden grow, or just being creative in some certain way. That all that's really a magical thing. And one of the high points of the Kriya Yoga practice is that it's given me an ability to appreciate that, rather than searching for something supernatural that you might see on TV.
When I was typing this question earlier, sometimes it can be a hard question to kind of quantify for people, like how has it benefited you, especially when it's been part of your life. I think if we're similar, yeah, I think it's been about 20 years for me. And it's been a part of your life for so long that it's hard to kind of see yourself outside of it. Um, but what you said there about being able to just appreciate life, for me, when you talk about profound experiences, I think that is a profound experience, being able to just, you meet somebody and you recognize in them um, a subtlety to who they are, which is just not going to be available to you if you're distracted with all the other stuff that seems so important. And when we talked about the kriyas, the practices, to kind of get to that point where you can have an appreciation of the subtle expression of life as we're engaging in it, all of them kind of work to systematically, progressively, to through all these years that we've been practicing, to like, still be able to notice and have wonder at the magic of life. That it's always kind of mesmerizing, just how profound a very ordinary experience can just show up and be. Um, and I think it's very hard to communicate that because we're all experiencing the world, and the colors are the colors, and people are people, and the atrocities are the atrocities, and the joys are the joys, and we all have the same thing. But there's something else that kind of reveals itself, I think, through the consistent practice. And it's a bit like we were talking about, you take it where you're at, and you initially you might engage in physical postures as a way to, become more familiar with your physical body, and be able to overcome restlessness and to sit. But that's a process which will allow you then to move into a deeper experience of who you are. And the whole practice cumulatively is working to help you to go extremely deep into that experience. And so when you are engaging in life, that depth, that profundity is still resonating in how you're engaging with things, how you're perceiving things. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess one of the earlier questions in this series about, why is it important? I think that was the question. Was it something like that? Why is it important to practice Kriya Yoga?
Why is Kriya Yoga so important?
Yeah. Well, it's important because it is one way to sort of encourage the understanding of your role or our role in, I guess you could say, the evolution of consciousness. And this is something that would probably take a few hours to explain on its own, but I'll do my best here. Many people think that as human beings, we're here to do a few things, have babies, go get inebriated, build a successful career, have relationships, all the stuff, all the stuff that most human beings want to do. And it's true that there are some worthwhile things that we can engage in as human beings, but what a lot of people do is they kind of get stuck in that sort of loop of thinking, well, if I just have one more kid, if I just get one more promotion, if I just have a little bit more money, that's what's going to do it. And the reason Kriya Yoga is so important is because it helps to encourage getting off that wheel and recognizing there is a deeper rhythm to life. There is a deeper experience to life than being human. Just like theoretically, we've all gone through an experience of the inanimate, the rock kingdom, and the plant kingdom, and the animal kingdom. And once you keep moving through these levels of consciousness, you eventually experience human consciousness. And so anyone who's a human being right now is already quite evolved, really, in the idea of consciousness. But there are levels beyond that, and we can't really talk about those. They're incomprehensible to the human mind, but we can go to them, we can experience them. And Kriya Yoga is one way, which would be considered like a shortcut on how to do that. Someone once asked me, is there a shortcut well, this is the shortcut, because you could spend millions of years, or you could spend one lifetime doing Kriya Yoga. But any authentic spiritual tradition and practice is giving you that opportunity. So the reason it's important, it's really only important for those people whose agenda is to, in a sense, wake up or recognize those deeper rhythms of life. For people who don't find that interesting, they are still a human being, which is very, it's a very noble thing. And their exploration of their desires and their wants and these types of things, for them, that is an important part of their path. But in time, as humans, we kind of wake up to this inner knowing. There's a little bit more to it. And that might be, I guess you could say, why I became interested in Kriya Yoga, because I felt there was just something a little more than what I was noticing. And the process gives you the capacity to feel that out. So that's why it's important.
Yeah. Yeah, just on that note, for somebody before they engage with Kriya Yoga, their life might be such, they're living in a certain way, they have a specific position in their workplace, and the dynamics of their life might be a certain way. And then through ongoing practice of Kriya Yoga, that might not change at all in any way. It might, even after 20, 30 years, as long as they're not retired, it might stay in and around the same, what they are dedicating themselves to in their life may stay in and around the same, but who they are in relation to it will shift. But as may be the case, through the process of starting to disentangle from the everything which is working within them to determine how they're going to experience life. Now, through the process of Kriya Yoga, they're no longer entangled with that, so they can see it objectively. And so they might start making choices to change that dynamic. Or they might say, actually, that dynamic is fine, and just continue to go with it. It's an interesting thing, because you'll remember, Ryan, and I'm sure there's probably people listening here have heard the expression before enlightenment, chopping wood, carrying water, and after enlightenment, chopping wood, carrying water. And that expression could be explained for many different things, but around the idea of before you get engaged in this process, life is kind of more just happening to you, and you're just going along with it. And the dynamic of it feels like it's just, you're kind of just flowing with it. And that's being determined by everything that is being stored away within you, energetically, emotionally, mentally, and it's determining your experience. Through the process of Kriya Yoga, you're starting to shake that all up. So you're no longer in its possession, you're no longer enslaved by it. And so the choices you've made, you can see them now from a new perspective. And maybe you'll decide to continue living in the same way, but you're making a decision from a different perspective, as opposed to a feeling like life is just happening to you. Now you are a part of the whole process, and
Right.
it's freeing.
Sorry, my YouTube feed is doing something weird, so I hope everyone still on YouTube can see this. But I was listening to what you were saying, and I absolutely agree. And
I can see you on YouTube, and while you're handling your technical concerns, I'm just going to check in with everybody who's joined us here on Instagram. Thank you for being here. And we've been talking away, and we may have been saying things which are triggering off further questions. So if you have anything you'd like to add to the conversation, or any other questions that arise, just put them in the comment section, and we'll try and get to them before the end.
Yeah.
So we're talking about benefits, and yeah, when you were saying something there, when we look at yoga, in the world, and then there's an understanding that maybe it's something that you do on a mat within a yoga studio for an hour or two twice a week, or maybe every morning, and you perform different body bends of different kinds, and maybe some breathing. And then we compared that to Kriya Yoga, and what the emphasis is on, more the systematic working deeper and deeper. Then when we talk about the benefits, and we talk about the objective or the goal of Kriya Yoga, and we're talking about it as being to experience life from a new perspective, to shift our perspective on what's going on here. But there's also benefits at a level which I suppose is related to the practices at the level that we come in at. Uh, I've heard somebody distinguish between wellness and well-being. Well-being referring to what the goal of Kriya Yoga is, that we can experience our being in a way where we are well within it. There's nothing distracting us from having that experience. And wellness being related to our physical health and, maybe just our state of mind. And it just, when you were talking there, when people ask, well, why would I do Kriya Yoga? Like, what are the benefits of it? And then we can outline what the overall objective is. But there are other benefits that come in along the way, which are more pertaining to our everyday experience. Just the breathing exercises alone facilitate a change in physiology, a change in the workings of the mental processes, which allow for an experience of relaxation. It's which then facilitates our being able to move into concentrated states and experience meditation and work deeper. But all of it is beneficial for our overall wellness. But maybe would you have anything you'd like to add on that tone or the topic?
It is an interesting idea. Why do you do it, and what are the benefits? They're really pretty straightforward. When you start taking care of your body a little bit better, you might be a little happier, or you might be a little bit less distracted by colds and things. When you start to practice meditation, your thoughts become more organized, which means you can think more clearly. You can get things done a little bit better. You also might be able to have better control over your states of consciousness. So many people experience moods and difficult emotional states. And while it's perfectly valid that a lot of those could be due to underlying psychological issues, sometimes it's just because we haven't practiced recognizing that, oh, I can change my state of consciousness and I don't have to be affected by some of these negative things that come and go in my life. And so learning to have a greater belief in yourself and a greater capacity to navigate your states of consciousness, that's wonderful. Think about people at the top of their profession who, when things go wrong, they can navigate their states of consciousness such to say that, well, it's going wrong, but you know what? I'm going to stay calm and I'm going to look at the options. I'm going to figure this out. And that's why they're at the top of their profession, because they're able to roll with the punches, I guess you could say. So, on a very fundamental level, the basic practices of Kriya Yoga do that for you. And so anyone, even if you're not interested in spirituality, can benefit in that regard. But if you are interested in spirituality, then once you get a handle on all of these things, then you can actually start to figure out, what is God? What is the infinite consciousness? What is divine love? What is it like to have an experience of truth and beauty and the wholeness of life? So it can really impact us on whatever level we are able to engage in. So the benefits are really just limited to our own imagination, I suppose.
Yeah. Very good. We talk about the practice and then we talk about the benefits. The next thing that was presented during the course of the month on Instagram with the different posts was, well, what's required? What do I need to do to I was toying around with different qualities or different things that might be needed, and a lot of people answered that patience, focus, and commitment. They were the overriding qualities. Of course, there's a whole stream of qualities that we could list off. What about you in your own practice? Do you feel that there's any kind of, well, maybe it's changed and shifted throughout the years, but is there an overriding kind of quality that you feel that has been helpful for you to support you in your own personal practice as a Kriya Yoga practitioner?
I think those that you just listed are really the ideals, because they're going to be necessary for success in any area of life. If I want to learn how to do something, I have to be willing to get up and be committed to it and be patient as I fail multiple times and keep going and devoted to learning. I think that's an important one, because when you get started, you have to be open to learning from your mistakes and so on. But at the end of the day, I think it comes down to an intelligent consistency. Apply what you understand as best you understand it, and then keep applying it. And then that creates sort of a foundation to see, all right, well, how can I build upon this? And then you research more, or you talk to your Kriya yoga teacher, or you pick up the Yoga Sutras and you wonder, okay, well, how can I broaden my application? How can I broaden my practice? How can I take it from just sitting in meditation to applying the ideal in the real world? And that's what makes all the difference. I'm sure a lot of people who might be watching this, they've probably been on the forums or watched other YouTube videos, or been involved in that kind of a thing. And there's always a lot of talk about, well, you just need the right technique. You just need to find like the perfect tradition, which is untainted by time, right? And that's an ongoing debate. And I think there's some truth to finding authentic knowledge. But I think it's also important to recognize that the more you search for something the more that you search for something that you think is going to be the magic bullet, the more time you're going to waste. And no matter where you are, no matter who you learn from, if you are discerning and open, you can practice and you can observe, is this helpful? Has this contributed to positive inner growth? And if it does, you keep engaging it. And so an openness and discernment, I think, is two very important qualities to add to that.
Yeah. And you said the magic bullet. It gives the image of finding something and then when you shoot it or when you apply it, it's going to bring about a kind of flick the switch kind of transformation. Maybe you sit down a couple of times and you expect for some kind of radical transformation. And I think I'd be capable of that as well. I think when I started out, it was that intense desire to have that experience and to really not have to wait just to get it now, and with that, then there's a kind of a tendency to go in that search for something perfect to make you perfect, but it is very much a process which requires working through what we have become so habituated to become entangled with. So we have dedicated a lot of our days on this earth to living from all that is determining how we experience life. And then just to expect something to turn that all off, well, that's going to undo things in a way where it could actually cause our falling apart. It could cause our not being able to live coherently within our world. So we want to be able to systematically work through it and actually know that the techniques are something which work progressively over a period of time. And Ryan, from your own experience, that when you look now where you are, even to when I knew you 10 years ago, you could say there's been a shift in your understanding and your insights.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's important. It's, as I mentioned, when David and I did the retreat in August in Ireland, the retreat was falling on the exact week, sort of the same series of dates as to when I first met Mr. Davis, my Kriya yoga teacher, and David's Kriya yoga teacher, and I was initiating the practice the exact week and the exact dates and so on. So it was kind of interesting. So it was exactly 23 years ago in August that I first began practicing Kriya yoga. And David mentioned 10 years ago. I would even go so far as 5 years ago. Each time, as the years go by, and as the practice, as I kept practicing, my understanding of it is very different. So when I do like the Kriya Pranayama techniques now, well, the experience is radically different than what it was when I first started 23 years ago. It's even radically different than when I was doing it 10 years ago and 5 years ago. And certain meditation practices, sort of the results and the response that those practices give, like that is more dynamic now. So I think really, as with all things, the more that you are curious about, interested in, intently looking at something, the more alive it becomes. You know, so being a musician who's been playing for 2 years versus someone who's been playing 23 years, the one who's been playing 23 years has such a depth of dynamism, I suppose, with their instrument that they can kind of evoke and speak through. And it continues. You know, I say this a lot in lectures. There was, I think he was a famous jazz guitarist, and he was practicing into his 80s. And he was interviewed one time, and someone asked, why do you keep practicing? You know, you're already an accomplished musician, you're in your 80s. And he said, because I noticed just a little bit of improvement each time. And I think we have to approach all of our spiritual practices that way. Keep them alive, dynamic, not a magic bullet end result. You know, our whole life is supposed to be an engagement of it.
Yeah. Because I think fundamentally it's not time that's the measurement. It's that's part of the delusion, I suppose, that it's kind of, well, if I do this and I do this, then I'll get this. And if I spend this hour and this hour and this hour, then I'll, you know, by this amount of time I should get to here. And then we might even refer back to stories we've heard. But I think that's the very essence of life itself, as it expresses that there's no singularity. It's particular to each one of us. And then what we're endeavoring to experience is, depending upon what we've just been talking about, our whole makeup. And then what does it entail for us to have to go about undoing our entanglement with everything that has been working to determine how we've been experiencing life up until now. And there's no measurement to say how long it's going to take to work through all of that. But it's a very worthwhile task, regardless of how long it's going to take. It's a worthwhile task. And even though the end result may not come quickly, there will be results that will be of benefit along the way. And so the task it's not a futile one. It's very meaningful. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
I have here the other thing, when some people were saying, they said patience, focus, commitment. And then a couple said a teacher.
That helps.
So you mentioned that in your comment. So I'll let you pick that one up.
That a teacher helps, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, with all things,
yeah,
learning from someone who already knows what's going on is really useful. You know, I could figure out how to rewire my house all by myself, and that might result in some injury. Or I could go talk to my dad, who's been doing it for 40 years, and he can just tell me how to do it. So I think the same is true with our spiritual practice. The trouble is finding an authentic source of information. That's the hard thing, because
yes.
As you might know, these days, everyone's met Babaji.
Yes.
I feel a little left out. so anyone can say they've met Babaji and that they have this capacity to teach and so on, and that's really convenient, because if you can just say that you've met, you know, this immortal figure, which is relatively inaccessible to normal human consciousness, well, then you don't have to answer to anyone or anything about your process.
Yeah.
But if you are able to find a tradition where there's been a teacher who has successfully navigated the situation of Kriya Yoga or spiritual realization, and they have had students who they recognize this person has the capacity to continue sharing this, and then they have students and so on, well, then there's like a lineage of authentication there. So it's actually rarer to find someone who is part of that process than it is to meet someone who's met Babaji these days. so I think a teacher can be very helpful, but without all the mysticism about it, it's just because anyone who's achieved something, they can help you navigate the pitfalls and to do better, make better headway. Just because of the knowledge that they have, and that saves you a lot of time. So that's one of the main reasons that is an extremely important thing.
Yeah. Well, in my professional career, I've been involved in education, um, and there's a dynamic that's shared between teachers and students in whatever discipline. That, like you were saying, learning how to the rewiring. There's the practical things, and then there's the aspect of other qualities that are kind of taken on. Like, I remember at one point I was teaching art to a group of teenagers, and one of them commented, "I'm just not as passionate as you." And for me at the time, I wasn't heavily engaged in art. I had an appreciation, a curiosity, all the things that are kind of wake up within you as you're engaging in this practice. And I suppose I was bringing that to the table. But for the student, it was more than just having the medium that they were working with or whatever they were trying to do at the time. I can't remember specifically. It was more about my whole person, what I was bringing into the room as somebody who was trying to help them to go through the process themselves. So I think there's aspects to the dynamic between a teacher and somebody who's learning that gives them more than maybe just the information.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to say?
Can I say something? Yeah, yeah. There is something more than just the information, and that's why not just in yoga traditions, but in martial arts traditions and other traditions, it's like by being in the field of someone who is successful doing something, you tend to be more successful, and that's not just a spiritual thing; that's a life thing. I've been a musician all my life. And when we were in Ireland again, David drove myself, my fiance, my stepdaughter, and my partner fiddler Claire around. And he knows how good Claire is as a musician, and she's so much better than me. But by me playing with her, just being around her, she's not teaching me anything because I don't play the violin. But just being caught up in that field of hers, which is an amazing musician, in the few years that I've been around her, I have become much, much better than I ever was. So there is something about having an association with someone who represents the state of consciousness that you're aiming for. And that could be in business, that could be in music, and in spirituality, it certainly is an important thing. And that's why I like spending time with David, because he represents that. I remember, do you mind if I tell the story about staying at your place?
No, you can say.
In the Om vibration?
Yeah.
Yeah. So usually when people meditate in certain areas for a long time, my experience has been that I can really hear like a sound, like it's the Om vibration. That's how it's described. And as we were in Ireland, we were spending one night at David's flat, and we were staying in his room. And as soon as I laid down, I heard that sound, and it was so loud in my ears. And I thought to myself, I wonder if he meditates in here. I wonder if this is where he meditates. And the next morning, sure enough, I asked him. He said yes. And why? Why is that important? Because just knowing David, being in the environment that he meditates in, I could feel that. And so, if you're able to attune to have a relationship with someone who represents that, you learn to feel it too. So there's, aside from the information and aside from the experience, there is some kind of resonant or vibrational aspect to the situation too.
I think maybe we can simplify it and sum it up with, was it Paramahansa Yogananda said, if you want to be an artist, hang around with artists.
Exactly. Yes.
There's a comment after coming in here. Just why I'm seeing it, I'm not so au fait with all of this. So as I see it, the question is, when Paramahansa Yogananda and Roy speak about going all the way, what are they talking? Oh, what are they implying?
Is that for you? Want me to answer that?
Well, I asked the question, so it feels
Okay.
natural.
Yes. Okay. Okay, I'll answer. And as you all can probably tell, we have a good time when we teach together. So in 2025, meet us in Ireland again.
There'll be a lot of time.
But anyway, yes. So what is Paramahansa Yogananda and Roy? What do they mean when they say go all the way? My understanding of that is go all the way as far as you can to understand what it means to become still inside, what it means to develop knowledge, spiritual knowledge of what you are as the wholeness of life, and not get fixated on experiences or ideas. Mr. Davis would always say, no matter what meditative experiences you were having, he would say, it's okay to enjoy them. It's okay to let them hold your attention so that you can go more further inward. But he would say, eventually you do have to ask, what is beyond this? What is there something more to know or to be or to experience? And so to go all the way is to continue to ask that question until there is no more, I don't want to use the word inspiration, until there is no more, it doesn't even arise. It's as if there is just a knowing that this is the direct experience. And that's it's hard to talk about, but that's the best I can do. You have anything to add to that, David?
Well, just on a practical level, I think when we were talking about the practices, and then I think I mentioned about it, like we often think of it in terms of a time span, that how long is it going to take me to achieve the results of my practice? And then when we just give up the idea, well, it's not based on time, it's based on how much you have to work through, how much there is that you need to, I used the word at the very beginning of our talk, purge, but how much basically we need to go about disentangling ourselves from everything that has been influential and determining how we experience life. How long is that going to take? And then we talked about how it's all worthwhile, regardless of how long it's going to take. There's always going to be an experience of having shifted and moved into a more subtle understanding of how everything works. And then, from what I understand of the expression "go all the way," it's kind of, don't get complacent just because you're satisfied with where you may have arrived. Oh, well, things have shifted quite a bit now when I've been practicing for 5 years. It's not a case of just going into cruise and just sitting with that. It's a case of acknowledging but there's more. There can be more. There's more that can be experienced. And so the effort in the application of oneself to the practices, it should never be a case of having to, of just letting go of it. Because even when you do arrive, even when you might work through all of that and arrive at a space when you feel like you've got it all down and you've kind of you've reached the end goal and you've ticked that box and you've gotten there. It's not, from my way of seeing it, it's not a case of that, because you're still engaged in life. And so there's still the experience of having to navigate the ins and outs of life, which is always like riding a wave. And so there's never that sense of absolute perfection that we were talking about earlier. There's never going to be that sense. There's always going to be the sense of you and your subjective position engaging in an experience. And there's always going to be that us and them feeling in terms of our experience, but how you're positioned in it in terms of your identification with the details of all of that, as opposed to your ability just to observe it and witness it, that will change the degree to which you're experiencing the end result. But you're always going to have to ride that wave. It's because life is life. Maybe you'd say it differently. Maybe there's something you'd add on that.
No, I think you mentioned the idea of the wave, and that's a great idea. It's like, does a surfer want to catch the final wave?
Yeah.
No, the surfer enjoys the waves, the surfing. And so I think it can be true of a yogi while the yogi is still working through a physical body, is that it's not about catching that final wave. Otherwise, we would just go take care of ourselves in, efficient ways, I suppose. But that's not what we're supposed to be doing. This is the important thing. Mr. Davis would always, I don't know if he would always say this, but I remember during the final few years that I knew him, he put a lot of emphasis on how do you want to live your infinite life? And that always really stuck with me. How do you want to live your infinite life? Because he would affirm that this is your infinite life. So right now, what you are perceiving is your infinite life. So the question isn't, do you want to get to the end of infinity? The question is, while you are engaged in infinity, what do you want your experience to be like? And so the idea of why we practice yoga is to get very clear on that. And then you mentioned you might still be doing the same things that you did 20 years ago. Well, absolutely. Last week was Thanksgiving here in the United States. I had a meal with my family. I did that 20 years ago too. A few days ago, I got together with a friend and played some music. I can remember doing that 20 years ago. I chopped some wood. I did that 20 years ago. So, but the difference is while infinity is happening, while we're observing the changing forms of nature, the difference between myself now and 20 years ago is simply a matter of presence, a matter really, I would say, presence or awareness. And so how present or how aware do you want to be? And then to follow that up, some people might say, well, I don't want to be present. I don't want to be aware, because that's why a lot of people drink and do drugs, because they don't want to be aware, because they're aware of all of the traumas and torment within the world. Well, there is going to be that kind of stuff in the world. But as you become more healthy minded, you experience well-being, you know how to relate to those things and to navigate them, and they don't rip you apart when they happen. It's an experience that you are able to relate to. And so as you're engaged in your infinite life, it doesn't have the same ridiculously crushing effect when difficult things happen, when you have a greater sense of presence or awareness. And then when good things happen, you're able to actually be more alive and dynamic in it. So, this whole idea of how do you want to live your infinite life, that's the beauty of Kriya Yoga, is that my experience has been, is that it allows you to live your infinite life in a way which is peaceful. That's all I've got.
So Ryan, on the Instagram, your last 30 seconds kind of broke up, and it sounded like it was the ending of what you were saying. So you were saying you're living your infinite life. Could you just repeat what it was that you said?
Yeah, I can try. Okay,
Not the whole
like
thing,
I'm
just
living.
the finishing up line or two.
All right. I would say that what Kriya Yoga does is it allows you to live your infinite life with greater presence and with a greater sense of peace. So that's what I remember, what I think I was saying. But you can cross-check that on the YouTube feed, maybe.
Well, it's always interesting when we have to say something twice. It's a kind
Yeah.
of what's the disparity, what's the shift. But the word that you brought in there at the end was peace, and
Uh-huh.
the person who contributed during the course of the month, and they said, well, reasons for practicing Kriya Yoga is because eternal peace, you'll experience eternal peace because of direct experience and knowledge about the truth of life. And we, for those
Yeah.
of you who've just joined, we talked around this idea of peace and how it can be ambiguous and all of this. But it is a word that that kind of sums up that our experience of living is one which is kind of uh, at a position where we're able to experience the peace even when it's not necessarily peaceful, even when there's things. Yeah, but
Right. So it's not like you've made it to the grave and rest in peace. When people make it to the grave, you think, well, at least they're done. So rest in peace. But I think the purpose of our yoga practice is to live in peace,
mhm,
to be
yeah,
alive in peace. So
yeah,
it's a little bit different nuance.
yeah. Yeah, and perhaps when that question around what did Roy and Paramahansa Yoga Nanda mean when they said you to do it all, to go all the way. Maybe the idea is that in order to be able to rest in peace, we need to be able to learn how to live in peace.
Absolutely. And that's a wonderful way to look at it.
Yeah. So Ryan, um, I've kind of come to the end of it. There's been no other contributions here that I can see. If there has been and I haven't seen it, my apologies. No, but just some people are asking to save it. My intention is to save this afterwards and put it on the Instagram feed. And Ryan's intention, if tech,
Technically,
technology,
if it all works,
technically
if it all
permitting,
works out well,
yeah,
it should be posted on the Kriya Yoga Online YouTube channel. It's live now, and I'm assuming it's working to save it there. So it'll be hopefully somewhere in the ethers or on the internet.
yeah. But this was just put together. We decided to do this at the beginning of the month as a way to close the Kriya Yoga Awareness Month. Um, it was my first time taking part, Ryan, and I feel that you were commenting about how it was quite regular in the posting, and I feel that there's a lot to the tradition, and depending on where people are coming from, they may have different types of questions, different types of curiosities. And I know from your content on your YouTube channel, you've kind of aimed to kind of meet people where they're at, depending where they're at in to the degrees that they're at. And it's not necessarily easy, but you've got content there available for people to maybe pick up on some of the points that we've made in the course of this live. Yeah. Is there anything that you'd like to say before we close up?
No, I was just seeing that you're doing, or were you doing an introductory course on Kriya Yoga? Is that available now?
I'm doing a preparation course for Kriya Yoga, and it's available all the time. It's done individually. It's not done as a group. So
Okay.
if somebody's interested, they just contact me, and then the way it's delivered is that the person will receive a lesson which offers instruction on the philosophy, the psychology, and the practice, and um, some lifestyle guidelines. And that lesson will take maybe 4 to 6 weeks to work through. It's delivered as recorded videos. And then after that, there's a requirement to just connect, and we have a one-to-one chat for 45 minutes or an hour. And then they can move on to lesson two. So that's the way it's, I suppose, logistically set up. But people can find out on, I have a website, www.davidmcgrath.ie, and you'll be able to find out about it there.
Sure. Yeah, I'll put it in the links of the YouTube video, assuming that this all works.
Yeah, we're still riding that wave.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you for your time.
Well, I've been watching 2-3 different screens, so
Yeah. Which one's the real?
But yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah.
Right. It's a good question, because the odd thing is I hear an echo, but I hear the echo before I actually hear you talk. So it's like a pre-echo.
I have a question for you. Is that something that you've been enduring for the whole conversation,
Yes.
or has it just started now?
It just comes up every now and then, but I find it really strange.
Yeah. It's strange. Some might say frustrating or distracting, but it's strange. All right.
It's supernatural. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. It's part of the real. Okay, so
Yeah.
thank you all for joining. We're going to finish up now, and yeah, you know where we're at if you want to reach out for anything. And Ryan, I'll be talking to you again soon.
Excellent. Take care.
All right, take care.
Bye.